Hello, one and all. Bienvenue à tous. If you're listening in live, thanks for taking the time to join us in your busy day. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for stopping by. However you're watching, welcome to Post Media's first Driving into the Future Roundtable, where we'll discuss, the future of driving. I'm David Booth, and I'm the senior writer for Driving.ca. The subject of today's roundtable is the most effective way to reduce automotive tailpipe emissions. I think we can all agree that reducing our carbon footprint is absolutely essential for the survival of the automotive industry. But how do we accomplish that? And what is the most effective, that is to say, the quickest road forward? Should governments choose the technologies of the future and regulate and incentivize the sale of electric vehicles, or should they simply set minimum standards of carbon dioxide reduction and let automakers determine the most effective technology to reach a reduced emissions future? To help us answer those questions, we're joined by Stephen Beattie, Vice President and Corporate Secretary of Toyota Canada, Don Romano, President and CEO of Hyundai Canada, Doron Meyersdorf, all the way from Israel, and CEO of battery developer StoreDot, and finally, Daniel Breton, President and CEO of Electric Mobility Canada. Welcome, gentlemen. And thank you for joining us today. Before we start proceedings, let me welcome all our viewers and inform them that we'll be trying to answer some of your questions at the end of this discussion. And what a great day this is for the discussion. On one hand, we just had announcements that Jaguar and Ford of Europe plan to go all electric. Wow. On the other hand, thanks to record low temperatures in places like Texas, we have reports that for today at least, it would cost you $900 to recharge your Tesla Model S. So with that news as bookends, why don't we get this party started? First up, I'd like to move to Danielle. Besides being an accomplished author on the subject of electric vehicles, Danielle, you're also a former Minister of the Environment for Quebec. So you're the perfect guy to give us a very quick, no Tolstoy here, a guide to the incentives that Quebec offers for zero emissions vehicles, especially since there are rumors that similar regulations will be enacted for all of Canada. So how do the regulations mandating minimum sales of EVs work? And what are Quebec's ambitious goals for EV sales going forward?
Thanks a lot, David, for this introduction. And I'm very pleased to be part of this selective panel, especially since I've had discussions with Stephen Beattie for years now. And I know him very well. I've met Don Romano in the past, and I think this will be a very important panel, very interesting panel. So, the best way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in transportation, there are many ways. We have to look at, first of all, making sure that people don't drive alone in their cars. Before any kind of technology, auto solo, we call it in French, is a way, if we get more people inside one car, we have in Quebec, 25 million seats that are empty on a Monday morning during rush hour. So that's one thing that we can do without any technology, just to get people to do more carpooling. Car sharing is another way that's very important. Telecommute is another way. But if we look at technology itself, there are different ways that we can work. We can make this work. There's the Norway way, which is one without a ZEV standard, where they will incentivize the purchase of electric vehicles, and they will punish very badly the one who decide to buy gas guzzlers. So that's a way to go that's been very efficient for Norway. To be honest, I'm not sure that people would like that very much in North America, because that would mean 100 or 150% in taxes for the purchase of F-150, for instance. So there's another way, which is the Californian way, which is a ZEV standard that's been in effect ever since 1990, and it's evolved over the years, which is now being applied in Quebec, and it's the way that BC is going, and at least 12 states in the US, they're headed in the ZEV standard direction. So for us at EMC, we think that the ZEV standard is a good way. but it cannot be the only way, because we have 4 pillars to get more people inside electric cars, whether they're hydrogen or battery electric cars. So you have incentives, we need incentives, infrastructure, we need regulation, but we also need a lot, and I mean a lot of education, because there's so much that people don't know about electric cars, whether they're battery electric or hydrogen car. And to finish off, I think that training will be very important, because a lot of jobs will go into electric vehicles, electric mobility, whether it's for light duty or heavy duty. We will need a lot of people to work in that particular sector. Was that short enough?
Yeah, yep. Stephen, you've been working with electric vehicles for almost 20 years. I believe you were responsible for launching the Prius in Canada. So most people would think you'd be cheering sales like there are in Quebec that mandate a minimum number of battery-powered cars for sale by any manufacturer. And yet Toyota, I believe, thinks a more diverse approach, it might be in order. Can you give me a rundown of why ZEV mandates might not work, you think, and why other technologies might be better for a quicker reduction of emissions?
So thanks, David. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the panel, and since Danielle mentioned me, I should just return the favor. I've enjoyed over the years a lot of conversations with Danielle, and one of the great things is he takes a very a coherent and multi-pronged approach to dealing with these issues. And that's really my answer on this one. A single silver bullet doesn't exist. Just in the same way that we have multiple different powertrains and fuels in the marketplace today, we're going to need to have multiple different technologies moving forward. And if our objective is to reduce carbon emissions today, then we need to be acting on a number of fronts. One of the problems that I have with the ZEV programs that exist both here in Canada and elsewhere in North America is they're really designed for the people who live in suburban North America with a garage or someplace to plug in their vehicle at home. But those are the vehicles that don't travel very far. So it's not a strategy that has really focused in on where are the major contributors to carbon emissions and global warming, and to use the available resources from government in order to support that sort of initiative. So whether it's ride hailing and car share, whether it's other forms of heavy fleet operations, whether it's the people who are able to make use of longer range vehicles, we need to be focusing on a whole range of activities. And the last part of this, and the one that the provinces are hugely unwilling to address, is the fact that the fleet keeps growing. And so, it's political suicide to tell anybody that you're going to take their car away, but you can't have old clunkers on the road as part of this mix. So, multiple prongs to the policy, and I think you can get there. And in terms of where we are, we sold over 35,000 electrified vehicles in Canada last year, and that's only going to grow in the coming years.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, Don, you've been an outspoken, and as I seem to recall, occasionally militant advocate for a more comprehensive road to emissions reduction. But even though you sell a few EVs and very few hydrogen-powered cars, most of your products are still gas-powered. So the question is, what is the quickest way for Hyundai to reduce its carbon footprint?
Well, right now, we are the second largest seller of all electric vehicles, BEVs, in the country, next to Tesla. So I think we're doing our part. I think that we're going to continue to work with the government. I don't think that there's any way to be independent from the government's actions. I think we have to work in partnership, and we're doing that. But I do think that the original purpose of the ZEVs was to increase supply. And I think that's misdirected now. You have over $100 billion being invested in electrification. I'm telling you, in the next couple of years, the question isn't going to be supply, it's going to be demand. And I think we're going to have to shift together as partners and begin to address the issues of how do we, and pretty close to what Daniel said, how do we increase through education And through infrastructure, how do we increase demand for EVs? How do we make people more comfortable with them? I drove an EV to work today. I probably wouldn't have done that 5 years ago. But once you've gotten behind the wheel of a pure EV, and I'm not talking about a hybrid or a plug-in EV, I'm talking about a pure EV. It's a sensational ride. It's a superior vehicle. It's an amazing, quiet, fast, enjoyable ride. Questions over charging time, questions over range are being addressed. Every year, it just gets better. The charging time gets less, the range gets longer. My Kona EV goes over 400 kilometers. And even in the cold weather today, and I'm not spending $900 to charge it, it still charges efficiently and it still drives perfectly. So I think, and I do agree with Stephen too, that there's going to be other options out there as well. We were the first to bring out a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle for sale in Canada, and we still sell them today. But there's really no infrastructure as of today to support customers. And if they're concerned about EVs, they're even more concerned about hydrogen vehicles. So we have to continue to work down this road, and we have to work together with the government. I think that the big issue that we face, though, is creating more demand through better education and through better infrastructure.
Thank you. Doron, you're fairly lucky. Don and Stephen, and to a degree, Danielle, need to sell cars. You just have to completely revolutionize the entire world of battery technology. That's a simple task in comparison. So from your viewpoint, what are the main factors slowing down the emissions, the adoption of lower emissions vehicles?
So, I think we forget that we are moving from our generation to, Generation Y and Generation Z. The younger generation, they are not captured with the old concept of a combustion engine. So basically, I think it's happening big time. And the number one barrier today is the charging, right? It's the anxiety, what is called the range anxiety, and some people add to that the charging anxiety. So it not only you may get stuck on the highway, but even if you do get to a charging station, either there's a long line in front of you, or you yourself need to sit there for like 40 minutes or 2 hours to charge. And that's the anxiety that we need to work on. And that's exactly what we are trying to do. Is the missing piece here of the technology is a battery that can fully charge in minutes. So the whole experience of the driver is exactly like fueling. Once this happens, and we are not so far from that, and it's getting better every year, as Don said, like in few years, you'll charge in minutes, full charge. So you'll get your entire 400 kilometers, you'll get them in 5 minutes, which is amazing. And the price point is also very close now. We're getting close to $100 per kilowatt hour, US dollars. And this is really the tipping point where, there's no reason not to buy an electric vehicle. The whole experience, like Don said, is amazing. It's a quiet vehicle. It accelerates beautifully. If you ever sat in a Tesla, it's like you sit inside an iPhone, right? I mean, everything is, large screens, software, automated, autonomous driving, everything is there. So I think the younger generation would not have a second thought, but to only buy an electric vehicle. Now, what the government needs to do is to make sure that the infrastructure is there and the subsidies are there and the charging is there, and that would not happen by itself. That needs to happen with regulation and with support from the authorities.
Okay, so most of the attention in recent years, and in fact, most of the attention on this panel so far has been on battery power. Hydrogen, I remember when it was an equal technology, maybe 10, 15 years ago, to batteries, and it's fallen out of favor. So, Stephen, I know that Toyota has a lot of development in fuel cell vehicles. What are the benefits of fuel cells compared to traditional electric vehicles, and where do they stand out as a technology that will be useful to us going forward?
So thanks, David. Let me just, before I do that, just bring us back a little bit, because I think your first question was, what's the fastest way to get carbon emissions down? And I think what I heard was a, sort of a sales pitch for battery electric vehicles, which is fine. And I don't think anybody's, suggesting that those technologies aren't appropriate. But the issue is, it's one technology trying to hit a multi-phase problem. And what often happens in one of these conversations is you get into a battery electric versus hydrogen debate over what's better, who's going to win, blah blah blah. In fact, it's not about that. It's that you need different types of technologies to attack different types of problems. And if you look at hydrogen, its biggest benefit is that it allows you to go longer ranges with less battery overhead in the vehicle. So particularly for something like a Class 8 transport truck, it's a better solution because it allows for those long range routes, and it doesn't have the weight overhead of a battery pack to take away from the cargo capacity of a truck. So if you think about it, battery electric is really good for short range, quick use, particularly urban oriented. Last survey I saw out of California showed that battery electric owners drove roughly half the distance of an internal combustion engine vehicle owner. So they typically are best deployed in that type of range. And if you want to lay the curves over each other, then hydrogen will tend to move toward the heavier, longer range vehicles. Battery electric is better for the lighter, shorter range vehicles, but they coexist. The benefit, particularly in a place like Canada, and let's narrow this in. The benefit from both battery electric vehicles and hydrogen is our clean grid and the ability to produce energy for our transportation system that takes us away from carbon-based fuels. And hydrogen, well, simple answer on this one is you can create it by running an electric current through water. We've got lots of electricity on a clean grid. We've got lots of water and an opportunity to take big vehicles off diesel.
Danielle, are there any downsides to the hydrogen fuel cells technology? Infrastructure costs compared to BEVs, perhaps even for cars?
Yeah, there are downsides to hydrogen light-duty vehicles. First of all, for infrastructure, it's a lot more expensive, than fast and super fast chargers. But I will agree with Stephen when we say that there's no silver bullet here. I mean, it's a range of different solutions for different uses. But I would like to say to something to Stephen though, because you said that most people who drive electric vehicles, it's for shorter range and suburban use. But because I heard that argument from Brian Kingston from CVMA a few weeks ago, and he said that in Quebec, 80% of electric vehicles are either in Montreal or Quebec. Actually, the right numbers are that 75% of electric vehicles, whether they're PHEVs or EVs, are outside of Montreal and Quebec. I myself live in the country, and on my street, way out in the country, there's 5 cars out of 12 which are either PHEVs or EVs. So it's actually easier when you live in the suburbs or you live in the country to have a full electric vehicle because you have a driveway or you have a garage. So the issue will be downtown areas when you live in an apartment building where you can charge or where you can fill with a hydrogen vehicle. That's a whole different issue. Regarding supply, I think there is an issue right now because if you look at the data from Dunsky Energy, you see that outside of BC, Quebec, and Ontario, it's really hard to find either a PHEV or an EV in Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta. So there hardly is any electric vehicle on the parking lots of the dealers. And you know as well as I do that a person who's a salesperson who sells electric vehicles or sells gas vehicles for that matter is paid when he or she delivers the vehicle. If the person has none of those vehicles on the lot and he has to wait 3 or 4 or 6 or 9 months to get the vehicle to the dealer, well, he will be paid in 6 or 9 months. So therefore, there's no incentive for that person to sell a vehicle that he doesn't have on the lot. So to me, that's an issue. But regarding hydrogen, I think that hydrogen is part of the solution. It's not the solution. Just like battery electric are not the solution, it's a part of the solution.
Don, unfortunately for hydrogen, the memory of, say, the Hindenburg and its reputation for danger, it still resonates quite a bit with people.
You have to be pretty old, don't you?
Very. But how is hydrogen safe? Is hydrogen as safe as, say, a gasoline-powered car now? What can be done to allay people's fears in that regard?
Yeah, they're tested just like any other vehicle is tested, crash tested, thrown off roofs. I mean, the amount of testing that goes behind it is significant. And yeah, there's always going to be a brand issue when you think of hydrogen. Just a movie, The Martian, you can, if you remember that movie, yeah, there's a lot of concerns about the volatility of hydrogen, but there's also a lot of concerns about the volatility of gasoline, and any combustion material has to be handled appropriately. But there, again, when we talk about an infrastructure, to me, it's not even about the safety at this stage. We don't have an infrastructure to even worry about safety right now. And so we have to really begin to talk about how we would develop a safe infrastructure to be able to provide the fuel necessary to power the vehicles that Stephen's talking about. I do want to make one point, though. I disagree with Daniel. I've got over 4,000 Kona EVs right now on dealer lots across the country. Anybody listening to this that wants an EV, I'll have it to them in 2 days, guaranteed. And I guarantee it's on their lots. That thought process that we don't have enough EVs existed. He's right. A year or 2 years ago. It does not exist today. And with $100 billion being invested in EVs, do you think the manufacturers aren't going to produce them? Do we think there's not going to be enough supply? Absolutely ridiculous. There's going to be more EVs than we know what to do with. We have to begin to focus on getting people educated and get the demand to increase. I have them right now. You want an EV, a full EV? Go to your Hyundai dealership. I know Quebec's been on lockdown. They're just opening up. So now's the time to go out and check them out.
Hey, this wasn't supposed to be a sales seminar. This wasn't supposed to be a sales seminar, dude. Okay?
But Don,
Okay.
I remember less than a year ago, people had to wait 6 months to a year to get a Kona EV.
You were right.
And Stephen is still having waiting time that are very long for the Toyota RAV4 Prime.
Okay.
So hold on a second.
Okay.
The part of the issue here is Danielle brought up the Dunsky report, which was sort of advocacy masquerading as research, which didn't bother to point out that they did their research right in the time when the federal incentive came into play. And so it basically sucked the pipeline of vehicles dry in that year. What it also did was, let Tesla off the hook because, of course, they don't carry inventory. Didn't mention the fact that we were number 2 in plug-in vehicles at the time behind Tesla, although we did it with very lean inventory. And then it patted GM on the back for having something like a 10-month supply of the Bolt at the time when you had the biggest incentives in the marketplace in history. And for me, having a big inventory at the time when there are large incentives in place, that's not an example of success. So there is a demand side issue here. There is a need for us to have vehicles that actually meet all of the requirements of consumers. And keep in mind, the number 1 selling vehicle in Canada is a pickup truck. So until you've got something that works adequately as a replacement for those types of vehicles, then you're really not in the game of taking carbon emissions down.
Okay. Doron, you're my technical guy on this panel. And so unfortunately, you're and my dreamer. So unfortunately, you get perhaps the tough questions. With regards to hydrogen, we now have plug-in hybrid vehicles. They marry a gas engine and an electric motor, which are completely disparate. Fuel cell vehicles and battery-powered vehicles are quite literally the same, identical almost, except for their energy source. One gets a battery, one gets a fuel cell. How difficult would it be in the future to make the plug-in hybrids of the future a battery fuel cell combination, which would have the ability to charge at home and also the ability to refuel even quicker on the highway? Is that a difficult process?
I think we are complicating life here. I think there's no doubt in my mind, at least, and many experts that I talk to, that for passenger cars, battery EVs are winning big time. Not only because of the convenience and the charging and the experience, but also it's an available solution. It works very well. It provides all the necessities of the driver, and it's happening already big time. The fact that now there are some hiccups in demand, I think it's only temporary. I think also all the hybrids, including the plug-in hybrids, are a temporary fix. And this is just because what I mentioned earlier, we are just not yet at the tipping point. But we are getting very, very close. Either it's in a year or 2 years. And then, Don, the problem reverses. We will have a problem because batteries are the new oil. And it's already there. And there are not enough factories for lithium-ion batteries these days. And this is where the Canadian government, the US government with the new Biden administration, and the entire Europe is way behind, Japan, Korea, and China that are winning big time with hundreds of factories for batteries and 70 to 80%. And it's growing. The ratio of batteries that are being produced, they are all in the East. And the technology is also in the East. You look at LG Chem or CATL or Samsung, all these technologies are there. Even, Tesla was until recently just a Panasonic technology. So the West has zero technologies, almost zero capacity compared to what's happening on the East. And this is, I think, where the problem will be real. And we'll be hungry for batteries because the solution will be there. And then the bottleneck will become, how can we produce? How can we deal with the over demand?
I would like to say something about that. What he said is really important because this is about more than just buying cars. It's about geopolitical issues. Because if we don't find ways to have some kind of ZEV supply chain regarding whether batteries or other components in North America, we may have some problems with Chinese and other Asian manufacturers. I mean, even Toyota, for God's sake, is having problems getting enough batteries after almost a quarter of a century making hybrid vehicles. So this is a real, very important issue, and there's an opportunity for Canada in there. That's why we are working on right now on trying to find stakeholders from all over Canada, whether it's for the mining sector, the auto manufacturers, research centers, the Canadian government, to work on a ZEV supply chain strategy because we have opportunity, we have the resources, we have the human resources as well. So I think there's a great opportunity for Canada and the US in there. I absolutely agree.
Okay, so I'm going to switch gears on everybody again. Okay, I mean, that's what challenge you guys, challenge the viewers. So far, we've talked about all manners of alternatives to the internal combustion engine. One of my favorite stories recently was that Porsche announced a way to scrub carbon out of the air, the carbon that an internal combustion engine produces, and then remake it, reformulate it into a synthetic gasoline. In fact, according to them, driving a regular combustion car, no hybrid, no electricity, would be carbon neutral. So my question, and I'll start with you, Daniel, is that if a synthetic gas really is net zero, is it not also worth promoting as an emissions reducing technology? Should we not enshrine that as part of this road to zero emissions as opposed to just mandating either electric or hydrogen powered cars?
To me, all solution that will make greenhouse gas emissions to go down can be a good solution. The thing is that I've been hearing about solutions like that for 40 years. So until it's proven that it really works, I wouldn't mind if the Canadian government, the NRC would take a close look at it to see if it's worth it or not. Like carbon capture, we hear about carbon capture. We've been hearing about that for many, many years in the oil and gas sector. I mean, this is something that we've put a lot of money into, and yet we don't really have a result that's worth it from a financial point of view. But hey, if it works, why not try it?
Stephen, you mailed a billion bloody hybrids. A synthetic gas like this, combined with your low consumption and your electrification of a car, does this not point at least a small foot forward going for just regular hybrids as opposed to, say, plug-in hybrids going forward?
Well, I mean, of course, we've talked about biofuels. We've talked about any number of range of different technologies that you can deploy in order to get your carbon footprint down. But let me go back to the battery side of it for a second. Just as an exercise, about a year ago, we looked at what would happen if we had to replace the then 66,000 RAV4 hybrids that we produce every year at our plant in Ontario. And so we calculated the CO2 reductions from those vehicles at about 72.6 thousand tons annually. In order to replace those, you'd have to, if you did it on the BC, Ontario, Quebec grid, which are the cleanest of the ones, you'd have to sell 27,000 BEVs. And if I were to work this out just solely on the basis of the federal tax incentive, that's $135 million. So you start spreading them across the country, put them into Alberta or into the Maritimes or whatever else. The number of BEVs in order to get your carbon reductions down goes up because the grid's not as clean. And then the incentive costs start to balloon as well. I think it's really critical for us to say, what's the most efficient way of getting our carbon emissions down? Everybody's right. The long-term solution is fully zero emission vehicles. But we've got targets as a country, we've got targets as a world in terms of dealing with climate change that need to be hit in the near term. And you should be throwing every available technology at it at the lowest possible price.
Thanks. Going back to hydrogen just for a sec, Don, you've got a few fuel cell vehicles. You mentioned the lack of infrastructure before. I've mentioned this in a couple of my columns. Tesla put EVs on the map by building its own recharging infrastructure. They were a fledgling company. They had no money. I don't know how they did it, but they managed it. If the auto industry, the rest of the auto industry, the legacy automakers want to push fuel cells as an alternative, why can't they do something? It'd be a lot easier for you to join with Toyota and many other manufacturers to build an infrastructure there. So, Tesla has shown that if you build it, the people will come. I certainly don't think it's up. We should wait around for the federal government. They're slow about everything to get behind this. Why don't manufacturers do like Ionity did in Europe, which is get together and build a high-speed charging infrastructure? Why doesn't industry get together and do the same thing for hydrogen?
Yeah, hydrogen or electric, right? Let's just go back to what the government's doing right now, and that is they're requiring manufacturers of the vehicles to build so many electric vehicles. But we're not requiring the fueling stations across this country to put in electric chargers or hydrogen fuel pumps. And I think we're missing the point. I think that's what's going to create the demand they keep talking about. I just think it's ridiculous if we think that there's going to be a supply issue with $100 billion being invested in this industry. Every manufacturer is invested fully, 100% into building EVs. But not every gas station, in fact, almost no gas stations have chargers. Imagine if every gas station had a fast supercharger, how that would change demand, how that would reduce the amount of concern people have for the range and the distance. And again, the charging systems, I mean, Doran can talk about it in greater detail, but they're getting faster and faster to the point where you're going to be able to charge a vehicle that goes 400 kilometers in under 15 minutes, in some cases under 10 minutes. So to me, that's the next step we've got to start looking at, is how do we get an infrastructure that's already part of the existing infrastructure to reinvest as the manufacturers have reinvested to put this whole program together of improving the environment. It's not going to be done just by the car manufacturers. It's not a field of dreams where you say, build it and they will come. We all have to get involved. The government, the fueling stations, the Petro-Canadas, the manufacturers, the battery suppliers, the whole production chain is going to have to look at their environmental footprint. I mean, how do we make the batteries clean? How do we mine lithium clean? How do we put this all together in one complete package that ensures that we're protecting our future? And I think that's the big issue right now. So whether it's hydrogen or whether it's electric charging, it doesn't matter. Infrastructure is still too weak to support the level of demand necessary to meet the growing supply that's either there now or coming.
Are you saying, Don, that the Canadian government should be inspired by the German government to now obliges the gas stations to have fast chargers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what I'm talking about, Daniel, is we have to create demand. And the idea that there's not enough supply is an old idea. There's plenty of supply, and it's all coming. And I foresee a real challenge ahead where there's not enough people that are willing to make the change. And we talk about Tesla and the success. I can almost guarantee, if it's anything like any other EV manufacturer, that sitting in the garage next to Tesla is a big SUV, right? It's a great car to have when you're driving short distance, deploy when you got to take the kids down across the border to the States or across the country, or even to Canada Wonderland. You're going to jump in the SUV. So we're not there yet. Tesla's appealing to a certain group right now, but to make it for the masses, we really have to think about how that infrastructure needs to expand. And to your point, David, quickly. That was the first thing you said. How are we going to do it quickly? Well, to do it quickly, Daniel, I think we have to get everybody involved, including the fuel stations. So when you drive into a Petro-Canada and you get your Snickers bar and your lotto ticket, meanwhile, the car's getting charged in 5 minutes, that's where the magic's going to happen in this industry.
Doron, Don mentioned the masses, and that's really where we need to work the most. You mentioned $100 a kilowatt hour as a tipping point, but we've been promised these tipping points for a long time, and where electric vehicles are going to be as cost competitive with gas cars. But most consumers still see the fancy Teslas and Taycans of the world, and they feel left behind. They want to know if a $20,000 electric car, a real electric car, not a golf cart with doors, but a real car with 40 or 50 kilowatt hours, not some fantastical pricing that loses money all the time like Tesla tries to get to foist upon us. A real $20,000 usable electric vehicle. And you're right at the forefront of the costing of this stuff. When are we actually going to see it, as opposed to the promise of it?
So it is actually happening. I mean, yes, we've been promised for many years. It did take many years, maybe 10 years to get there. But guys, we are really very, very close. We are today like at $120 per kilowatt hour. The Tesla Model 3, if anybody watched the battery day that they had a few months back, are promising a $25,000 Model 3 Tesla with the reduction of the battery cost. They're talking about the lithium sourcing, about the cobalt sourcing. All these things are being now much more cost effective. And I want to add also on the charging, and you mentioned Germany. Yesterday, BP announced that their subsidiary Aral is actually deploying 100,000 of 350 kilowatt stations across the country. So this is actually already happening in Europe, and they have to make it happen, not just because of the government, because the oil and gas companies like BP and Shell and Exxon and Chevron and all these guys, they already understand somebody has moved the cheese. They're not gonna stay with these pumps. All for the real estate model of a forecourt, of a gas station to work, it needs to be charging in minutes. Otherwise, all the hundreds of thousands of stations are becoming obsolete. And this is happening now in the coming decade. By the end by 2030, you won't see the stations as we see them today, the gas stations, because half the fleet is going to be already electric. So, the revolution is here. That's my point.
Okay. Final question, guys, and the same question for everybody. And please, we got about 5 minutes before I'd like to move on to the reader question. So a minute at most, okay? Okay. Many jurisdictions, including Quebec, and I suspect all of Canada, are calling for a total ban on sales of gas-powered cars by the most common date is 2035. If that's indeed the case, have people bought into EV so completely that the transition will be easy? Will consumers hoard their gas-powered cars because they're still afraid of range anxiety? Perhaps more to the point, what does the floor of a car dealership look like on January 1st, 2036, if there's been a ban on gas-powered cars as of 2035? Danielle, why don't you go first?
Well, I guess there will be a lot of plug-in hybrids, hydrogen, and full electric vehicles. I mean, it's going to be a range of different technologies. That's what I'm pretty sure will happen. To Stephen's point earlier, he said that, we have to have SUVs and pickup trucks because these are the most popular vehicles in Canada. So they're coming to market, the next few months. So you're absolutely right. I mean, before we get these vehicles on the road, these electric and plug-in hybrids and even hybrid pickup trucks on the road, there will still be a gap. So once that gap is filled, I think it's going to be a lot easier. We had a step on Sunday with GM announcing their new Chevy Bolt, which is going to be $7,000 cheaper than the 2021. So I think this shows that the price is going down. I actually made a calculation during the weekend, and I compared the Chevy Bolt EV with a Toyota Corolla L CVT. And if you're in Quebec, it's actually cheaper now to buy a Chevy Bolt EV than the Toyota Corolla L. So
but
I will send you the numbers. and so all that to say that, the rebates won't be there forever. We all know that. And I think it shouldn't be there forever. So as the price of batteries and the price of cars go down, the subsidies should go down as well, and that's where we need more supply and more different types of vehicles, and we will need so much education because there is so much disinformation being spread around by different media and social media on electric or hydrogen vehicles. It's unbelievable. I never thought I'd see this much. I've been talking about this for 20 years, and I still get some of the same questions that I did get 20 years ago, regarding how long is the battery going to last? How much is going to cost me to change change the battery? I mean, this is nonsense, but we have so much education to do.
Stephen, what's a Toyota dealership look like in 15 years after gas cars are banned for sale?
Well, given that we're currently running about 25% of our sales as electrified vehicles, it's just going to look more like that than ever. I think you're going to see a broader range of technologies deployed in the showroom. We just announced last week, for example, 2 battery electric vehicles that will be joining our fuel cells and hybrids and plug-in hybrids next year. That's just going to expand. And the answer is, why wait for them? And this goes back to infrastructure issues, for example. Last week, we announced a partnership with Lyft in BC to put hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in the hands of Lyft drivers, because we can do that with the existing infrastructure. So I think we shouldn't be waiting for the mid 2030s. What may be more problematic is if cities like Montreal decide to go ahead with their plan on banning internal combustion engine vehicles as of 2030. At that point, I would have some concerns as a car dealer about how I even service the existing vehicles that are on the road. So I think there's some very challenging conversations that we're going to have in the years ahead.
Don, what's a Hyundai dealership look like?
I think we first have to define what it means to not have a combustion engine. A hybrid has a combustion engine. We make hybrids. We make plug-in hybrids. They have combustion engines in them. So are we talking about banning even those fuel-efficient vehicles or absolutely no combustion in pure BEV, all electric? And I think that first we have to define what it is that we're going for. But I do believe that all of these different technologies play an important role in the future. And I think by 2030, 2035, everything is going to be electrified to some degree. And again, even a fuel cell is electrified. It happens to have a battery that's 20% the size of a BEV battery. So it has a lot of advantages, but again, without the infrastructure. And to me, that's the big issue. It's not whether we're going to produce enough vehicles to give to the dealers and to give to consumers to sell. That's not going to be the issue. It's going to be, are they going to be able to get their vehicle charged so that they feel comfortable with EVs? And I guarantee if we have this conversation a year from now, that's going to be the topic of conversation. How do we create more demand? And I think we can work together to do that. And actually, as Stephen said, we can beat the 2035 mandates. We can beat them by a long shot if we focus on demand.
Doron, do you think that, because again, you're touting a 5-minute battery, do you think that all cars in dealerships and being sold will be EVs, or is there place for these other technologies that we've been discussing?
I'm 100% sure 2035, everything is only fully battery electric, pure electric, no hybrids. The hybrid is a temporary fix to a problem of the range. This will go away very quickly. Yes, we will have hydrogen on the far end of the trucks and those that need to go, at least 1,000 miles, then it makes sense. But if you're talking about the dealership floor, 100% electric, no doubt about it. There's no reason to have anything that burns inside the vehicle. It's gonna be like only for museums. And as a hobby, maybe you need to get a special license. By the way, you'll need a special license to have a wheel. There won't be a wheel. It's all fully autonomous. We are almost there. Guys, you are missing the revolution. It's here and it's happening. 2035, no wheels, nothing. You'll watch a movie, you'll go to sleep.
Okay, now guys, we're going to move on to some viewer questions, and as I say, there's quite a few. And I hate to break the news to you, they're asking some of the same questions that as I am. So, for instance, Leif Sorensen says, when does Toyota and Hyundai expect hydrogen refueling infrastructure to be sufficient for the industry to transition to 30% of FCEV sales? So what's the date for that, guys?
Stephen, do you want to go?
Yeah, let me start with that. I guess the answer to that is we've been at the business of trying to electrify our fleet for the last 20 years. And I've made projections almost every year and have been wrong about when we'd hit certain thresholds. The reality of it was that hybrid, for example, only broke through because one taxi driver in Vancouver adopted it on a global basis. So, I think our best bet is to put as many technologies in the marketplace, push as hard as we can to get adoption, and we'll see what happens. But with respect to hydrogen, I don't view it as a retail play at the moment. I see it as something best suited to fleets, and particularly for heavy use vehicles like taxi or ride hailing and so forth. And that's why that's why we announced that partnership with Lyft last week.
I agree with Stephen. I think the next step in the evolution of fuel cell is for heavy duty trucks. And if we can establish an infrastructure for heavy duty trucks, say from Quebec City all the way down to Detroit, probably the most trafficked stretch of highway anywhere in North America, then it's a short putt to be able to increase the adaptability of hydrogen cars. But I think you have to start somewhere, and right now, bringing in heavy duty trucks that where time is money, and to charge those batteries is going to take even longer because there's more batteries and the distance is a challenge. I'm not talking about the short hauls. I'm talking about the long haul trucks. Fuel cell makes sense. But again, and it's a lot easier to put infrastructure together for the heavy duty trucks. And then you just see what happens. You see how people adapt and if they're willing to go that distance. But I'm kind of with Doran, and that is, I do believe that right now, and to your point, David, it's about all electric battery vehicles, and they're moving at a record pace right now. So, the production's coming.
So the next question is for both Doron and Danielle. And to your point, Danielle, about answering questions that you've been answering for 20 years, Mark Silverstone asks, what are the risks of electrocution and how will it be mitigated with the amperage necessary to charge electric car batteries in just 5 minutes? Who'd like to go first? Doron?
Yeah, definitely. It is a challenge, and we are taking it step by step. It's not, happening overnight. Already, people are using, with the superchargers of Tesla, they're using 120, 150 kilowatt stations. So it is happening gradually as we deploy faster and stronger batteries. And new regulations, new standards are being discussed in all the standard bodies, and we take part in those. And these are very serious discussions about, the potential hazard of high power charging. But it is an engineering issue, and it is being solved. So step by step, we are taking the measures to allow even the driver to sit in the vehicle when you have 350 or even half a megawatt of power being pumped into the vehicle.
Okay.
If I could say something about that, I've been hearing about the potential for electrocution for 20 years as well, and well, it's never been an issue. And when you look at level 2 chargers, which is DC current, compared to fast charger, one very important thing that people need to know is that when you plug your car to a fast or a super fast charger, it locks the charger in, so you cannot unplug the vehicle while it's charging on a fast charger. So you have to turn it off, turn the charger off, so that then you can unplug it. So I don't think a safety issue, and as he said, it's just an engineering issue that's been pretty much solved already.
Okay, next one. I think somebody named Stephen Ackerhurst wants to upset the kumbaya compromise we've had in our panel when he says, when do you think EVs will outsell ICE vehicles? Stephen, you want to take the first stab at that one?
It wouldn't surprise me if if you're taking a broad definition of EVs that around 2030 you're getting into that space. But it depends on a bunch of issues. It depends on whether or not we can get our cost factors under control. It depends on that supply chain issue that we've talked about earlier. And it depends on something else. And David, I think you hit that early on in this panel. But we've seen situations in North America, the last 2 years, for example, where California's had to go into selective shutoffs of their electric system, or you get the surge pricing in Texas and so forth. We can't be building infrastructure, and by infrastructure I don't mean charging stations, but electrical infrastructure for average loads. We have to build it for peak. And if we are really truly going to switch the on-road fleet to a fully electric fleet, then creating that headroom to allow for peak capacity is really important. So there are a whole lot of factors that come into it, but I think realistically the public mindset is sort of moving us toward 2030.
Don, what's your thoughts?
Today, if everybody went to a Hyundai dealership and bought a,
you told me,
but they're not.
We would outsell internal combustion engines this month. No, really.
Hey, you're banned. Off the show. Off the show.
Again, it will happen when we have an infrastructure that makes people comfortable. That's it. It's all about getting people. Daniel talked about education. I couldn't agree more. I think all of the, whether it's a kumbaya or we're fighting together, it doesn't really matter. It's about building an infrastructure of education, of systems, of processes that lead people to say, hey, this kind of vehicle I'm ready for it. This is for me. We can get there. And it's just a matter of how fast we can push that infrastructure and that education. Because again, as I said before, I mean, open up a paper, look at how many cars are being built by every one of my competitors right now. And it's not just Tesla anymore. It's all of us. We're all building EVs. We're all committed to EVs. We're all committed to a greener future. It's a matter of making sure that the customers have that same commitment. And to get that commitment, it has to be done through, again, education and infrastructure.
Danielle?
Well, I mean, if you look at what the government of Quebec announced, they said they want 1.5 million EVs, well, EVs or PHEVs on the road by 2030 in Quebec. So it means that before 2030, it's going to be more than half of the sale. That's the first thing. Second thing, regarding infrastructure, I think Quebec is an example in Canada. I mean, wherever I go in Quebec, I don't have a problem with fast charging infrastructure or level 2 charging infrastructure for that matter. So I think that Quebec and BC could be the good examples for the other provinces so that we can have enough charging infrastructure. When I go to en route, you know, the convenience store en route, you know, on the 417 in Ontario, I've seen some panels installed there 7 years ago saying there will soon be a fast charger here. The panels are still there, but the chargers are not. So that's a very important point. To Stephen's point regarding infrastructure, I'm not talking about chargers, I'm talking about utilities here. I had an important discussion about 2 months ago with a scientist from the US, and he said, if Alexander Graham Bell came back to life today and he saw this, he would be really impressed. And if Thomas Edison or Nikola Tesla looked at utilities from today and said, well, not much has changed. So they really have to evolve very quickly regarding fast charging and smart charging infrastructure for the future of utilities and charging infrastructure so that we can have a much smarter grid than we have now.
Okay. The last question, and it's the most biting question of all, guys, and it's going to Stephen at Toyota. Okay? Are you ready for this one, Stephen? Okay. Robert Butler asks, when will the electric range on your darn Toyota RAV4 plug-in be increased to 100 kilometers instead of the 60 or so I get right now?
So the question is, whenever you're engineering a vehicle, what's the price point that you're trying to hit versus the benefit that you're achieving? So every time you scale up the battery, you scale up costs, and you add weight that ends up, you know, taking away from your non-electric fuel economy. So we've already talked about the fact that there are solid-state batteries that are going to be coming from Toyota soon. Wait for them, because what happens with solid-state is you get, you know, lighter battery with higher energy density and better charging time. So I'm not making you any promises about a RAV4 with 100 kilometers range, but I am just telling you that the technology is constantly improving. And as you can imagine, as manufacturers, we're trying to put our very best offers in front of the public at all times.
Well, with that, and as a fan of the RAV4 hybrid, the Prime, and driving it right now, I can tell you the only thing I'd want out of it is a longer electric range. So guys, an hour's flown. That just about wraps things up. I'd like to say to all the readers out there, stay tuned next week for the next Driving into the Future Roundtable that will bring you all the hot and new cars of 2021. And of course, look up Motormouth every Friday for the latest in automotive news. And finally, to Stephen, I say thank you very much. To Doron, it's absolutely wonderful that you stayed up late, past normal working hours in Israel to join us. Don, an absolute pleasure as always. Et Daniel, je vous remercie infiniment pour nous avoir joints. Merci beaucoup.